Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We're blessed with good health, inshallah, and iman, taqwa, inshallah, and lots of amal salih, and opportunity to continue with our study of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and stories of the personalities of Islam. The intentions were seeking knowledge and teaching. I intend to seek knowledge and to teach, to benefit myself and to benefit others, to remind myself and to remind others, to profit myself and to profit others, to urge adherence to the book of Allah and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to invite to guidance and to guide to that which is good, seeking the face of Allah, His pleasure, His mercy, and His reward, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's continue on with our Fatiha. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Let's make our dua. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ارزقنا يا ربي فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين وإلهام الملائكة المقربين في عافيتي يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين وفقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واهدنا إلى سواء السبيل. اللهم انفعنا وارفعنا وعرفنا بالعلم النافع وانفعنا به أنفسنا وأهلنا وأوطاننا وديارنا وجميع المسلمين يا إله العالمين. الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Okay, we continue with our legacy. We are still the saviors of the Islamic spirit, and we are with Ibn Taymiyyah. They call him Ibn Taymiyyah. His name is Hafiz Ibn Taymiyyah, but we have other names of him. We have gone through his real name. All right, so he was born in 661 after Hijrah to 728. So that's in the 13th and the 14th century. All right, education. We've gone through quite a bit of the background of the situation of the place during his time, of the Muslim condition during his time. And also we went through last week a little bit of his childhood and his, we do know that he has a very profound memory. All right, we look at his education. Ibn Taymiyyah was from his childhood an industrious student. And as his biographers say, he never took any interest in games and sports. He's rather a serious student. He doesn't play around much because he is keen on studying and learning. Later on too, when he had grown up, no diversion, fun, or festivity could ever hold his attention. So he's not interested in all these things, right, that distracts people, so-called enjoyment and things like that. He's just focused on what he wants to do, and that is seeking knowledge. He is just focused on seeking knowledge. Nevertheless, his works bear witness to the fact that he was fully aware of the different sections of society of his time, their habits and customs, manners and morals, and even entertainments and creation. So it is quite obvious here. Although he was not involved in entertainment, in sports, and in the people, but he is aware. He was aware, right? He did study the realities of the people around him, of their habits and customs, the way their manners and morals. So he is a very observant person, right? And he looks and he understands and he learns and he infer, and not really infer, he realizes the realities of these people, right, during his time. It seems that he has not only spent his time as a scholar buried in books, but he had also studiously pondered over the problems of life and contemporary society. So he's not disengaged from society. He is aware of the melodies and the strengths of society. And so as he studied, he also studied society also. Ibn Taymiyyah gleaned knowledge of all the secular and religious sciences of his time. He gave special attention to the Arabic literature and gained command over grammar and lexicology. So here we can see our scholars are not only into religious knowledge alone, because it is important sometimes, it is important not only sometimes, actually, it is important to know some secular knowledge so that you are with the time, with the people. If you are only concerned with religious knowledge, you might not be able to relate to the people of your time. So you need to know, to have extensive knowledge to be able to relate to people of your time. So one of his great achievements was in Arabic literature, and he has a command over the grammar and lexicology. So this is the various language items. He not only mastered the Al-Kitab al-Sibawih, the greatest authority on grammar and syntax, but he pointed out his mistakes too. So he was so good at it that he could see the mistakes of this great book on grammar and syntax. His proficiency in this field proved immensely beneficial to him later on in the composition of his own work. So it's really important, right, to understand Arabic before you can move on to understand religion, right? And I read a very interesting statement by Imam Shafi'i, and he says, those people who understand Arabic are like jinns among mankind. So you wonder why, how come people who understand Arabic become jinns? It's not that part of the jinn, but the fact that jinns can see things which men cannot see. So he says those who know Arabic can see things which others cannot see, which is true, because you understand the language of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. He gained a thorough knowledge of the entire collection of prose and poetry available at the time. So this is a kind of scholarship we have among our great ulama. They are just amazing. Books, they read books. They're not just confined to just learning what is taught in school. Nowadays, our education system is not really doesn't really prepare us a lot. It doesn't really encourage people to be long life learners. And people after the A levels, after Sec 4, after poly, they just forget what they learned. They don't even know the things that they learned. And that's a failure of education, where you don't seem to know or don't seem to remember what you learned. And not only that, some people, a lot of us, actually, most of us are saying that whatever we learn in school is of no bearing to us, and no benefit to us in our later life, which is actually not really true. Yeah, maybe trigonometry and algebra, you wouldn't be using it in life, right? Or maybe chemistry and all those things that you learn in chemistry, right? The chemicals and the groups and how to form formulas and whatever, right? And physics and maybe geography. You don't see that. A lot of people doesn't see a need to learn all these things. But in reality, what we are going through in school is that we learn to analyze, we learn to read and comprehend, we learn to formulate ideas, we learn to skills. These are skills of life, right? So these skills are the ones that help us through. In fact, many Singapore students are very skillful in gaining information and presenting information. I was listening to a talk by Muhammad Ninoy. Very interesting. He says, it's not about gaining information, it's about transformation. That is a very big hurdle that we have to try to overcome. It's not really easier for most of us. All right, so he learns all of them, prose and poetry. He also studied the history of pre-Islamic Arabia as well as that of the post-Islamic era. So you can see that by studying all these things, you actually learn some kind of psychology of these people, their interests, their inclinations, what happened along the way. For example, if we have been studying a lot, alhamdulillah, number of scholars, and we also looked into the states during that time, the condition of the society during that time. We look into that also, the society during that time, and we do wonder, after we look at the Battle of the Camel and how they mutilate some of the Muslims. They are Muslims and they mutilate each other, and they go back to their old Jahiliyyah ways of mutilating bodies. Right, and that is the command of Rasulullah. So what happened along the way? What caused them to be in that state? Like they killed Sayyidina, they assassinate Sayyidina Osman radiallahu anhu in the month of Zulhijjah. We know that. We went through that, and that's haraman. Zulhijjah, no fighting or killing, and you kill your caliph, and they were Muslims who killed him. And then at least Sayyidina Omar was quite happy that the one who killed him was the one who stabbed him was not a Muslim. He felt good about it. But when you are killed by your own people for no really, really good reason, it's sad. Similarly, with Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu anhu, he was killed, he was assassinated in Muharram, month of Haram. So what happened along the way? So that's why history is so important. So these people, they learn history before Islam, the nature of the people, their inclination, their traditions, their customs, and after Islam, what changed them? And we can see that many of the Sahabas was transformed, right, from people of anger to people of wisdom and knowledge, and from people of obsessed with their traditions and customs to people who would reject traditions and customs. So this is how Islam has transformed people. The information is there, but transformation is important. The white knowledge thus gained by him gave him a breadth of vision not found among his contemporaries. So the more you learn, the more your eyes are open to lots of situations, and you are able to analyze things better than those who confine themselves to the books they are given in schools. You need to read widely to understand. When I was young, I remember reading this particular phrase, which said that one who reads, right, when you read a book from a scholar, right, you actually would gain insights which you would never have gained by yourself. So they have done the work and they have presented their work to you. So you are gleaning the works of these great scholars. So it's really important to go on reading and even listening. I mean, right now most of us are listening, but sometimes reading is better than listening, because you can actually gain more by reading faster in reading than by listening. Also, of course, listening to great scholars also is very important, because they have great intensive knowledge and they move on to other aspects of the book, which you might not be able to get if you just read the book. Right? And you are all free to just budge in and ask questions, or even give your opinions and share your experiences also. Right? Don't just keep quiet down there. It's really good to be interactive for me also, rather than talking all the time. All right, Ibn Taymiyyah also learned this calligraphy and mathematics were teachers of these sciences. Well, this is what they were. They didn't go to school, right? They don't go to a very established school, and yet they are very profound in knowledge, and they cover many subjects. Turning to the religious sciences, he studiously learned the Sharjah laws, jurisprudence. I'm sure the Sharjah or Sharia. It's probably Sharia. All right, maybe it's not. This is not. I didn't see the actual one. Jurisprudence, Hadith, and Quran. So he is aware of all the laws of Islam, Sharia laws, jurisprudence, fiqh, Hadith, and Quran. He studied the Hanbali system of law from his own father. So he wasn't Hanbali. he was a Hanbali, and his father, as we saw, his father and grandfather, they're very, very, very profound, very proficient scholars in their own self. In hadith, he first learned by heart, as was the custom in those days, Imam Humaydi's Al-Jami'u Ba'inu Sahikain, and then studied the science from several reputed teachers of hadith present at the time in Syria. So he was in Damascus. We saw him, his family traveling to Damascus during the attacks of the Tatars. And so this is a book that was learned by those inclined to study hadith. So he memorized it, right, learned by heart. And he also studied under various teachers. Ibn Abdul Hadi relates that the number of Ibn Taymiyyah's teachers in hadith exceeds 200. So you can see when you have 200 teachers, right, you would be exposed to many opinions of different teachers. So you see the differences and you understand why they do have these differences of opinions in understanding the various hadiths. Not everybody understands the hadith the way it is. I mean, the way, as Rasulullah has said also during his last sermon, he has informed people to pass on what he said to the later generations. And he even mentioned this. He says, the later generations might understand things differently from you. So it's very important that you pass on to them and they would learn lessons from the farewell khutbah of Rasulullah, farewell khutbah of Rasulullah in Arafah. Among these are included such evident doctors of hadith as Ibn Abdul Dayyam al-Maqdisi and several others of an equal rank and standing. So these are the great scholars during his time, and he studied under them, 200 of them. That's a lot of scholars to learn. Ibn Taymiyyah thus went through the Musnad Imam Ahmad and Sihah Sitiyah more than once to learn these from different teachers. So he learned books, right? 2 books, but these books he learned from different teachers. So that means he get different insights from these different teachers. So here we do understand their learnings. It's really, really intense and very profound, very intensive, right? They really learn. Ibn Taymiyyah had a fancy for the exegesis of the Quran. That means he loves to learn the tafsirs of the Quran. As he himself says, he had turned over the leaves of more than 100 commentaries and glosses of the Holy Scripture. So he learned, there's many commentaries out there. We are maybe just, we are exposed to not many, right? Online, we've got maybe tafsirs of Ibn Kathir, but there's also abridged, and then we've got tafsirs of Said Qutb, although some doesn't agree with his opinions, and a number of scholars actually doesn't agree with his opinions. And then there's tafsir of Zamakhshari, and there's tafsir of Jalalain, but quite a lot of the tafsirs out there are in Arabic and not translated. So we are only, because we are not proficient in Arabic, so we do not have access to all those great Arabic tafsirs available. He was endowed with a bent of mind, one to reflect and meditate upon the pith and meaning of the Quran. So Allah blesses him with this inclination, right, to reflect and to think, right, and to meditate, and means to really ponder into the pith. The pith means the pith means the essence, right, the deep meanings, the core of the Quran. So he looked through them, right, with great knowledge. Ibn Taymiyyah has himself explained the way he used to bring his mind to bear upon the study of the Quranic verses, right? So he actually has books on how he worked on the verses of the Quran and tried to find deep meanings in the Quran, and of course help himself to become better. Says he, sometimes I've gone through as many as 100 commentaries of a single verse of the Quran. So he's not happy with 1 or 2. He wants to know the opinions of others, and 100 comes in as a number. It's a lot. After I've dipped into these pages, I've supplicated to Allah to enlighten me about the true content and significance of the ayah. So you can see this is a true slave of Allah who realize that different people have different opinions, understandings of the verses of the Quran. So he knows that eventually the knowledge comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he made prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enlighten him and give him that ability to understand the true content and significance of the ayah. I pray to Allah thus on these occasions. You are the exalted teacher of Adam and Ibrahim alayhimus salam. Favor me, O you, let me say, with the essence of this ayah. So you are the teacher of Adam and Ibrahim. So now I ask you to favor me, Ya Allah, with the essence of this ayah. Often I betake to an abandoned mosque or wilderness and beseech Allah with my forehead on the ground. So this is what he wakes sujood and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, abandoned mosque can be a great place because mosques are place prayed in by many. And among those who prayed in mosques, we should believe, right, that there are great scholars, great awliyas of Allah, great friends of Allah, great Muslims, very strong, and we gain lots from their presence. I mean, they were not present anymore, but we can ask Allah when we go to such places, right, to bless us with the blessings of those people whom Allah loved and had prayed in the mosque. And this is one way in which we gain blessings also, right? So it's good when you go on holidays to actually visit mosques and pray in mosques. And holidays are good also because it is said that when you go out and pray, it is said that the earth on which you prayed on, right, would actually bear witness to you praying on them. Sujood on. So you go all over the place, all over the world. You go, never forget to pray, and the earth will bear witness for you in the next. So the more people bear witness to your good, the more doesn't have to be people. The more creations of Allah bear witness to your good, to your sujood with Allah, right? The more, inshallah, Allah will allow more ease for you, inshallah, in the next world. So he sujood and asked Allah, O guide of Ibrahim, grant cognition to me, grant understanding to me. So he asked Allah to bless him with understanding. He appealed to Allah as the guide of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Why Ibrahim alayhi salam? Now Ibrahim alayhi salam and Adam, so the first one is Adam and Ibrahim. Adam has nobody to guide him. He's got no mother, no father, nobody. Likewise with Ibrahim also, because Ibrahim was born in a place where everybody, even it's not father, his uncle, like whom we call father, right? Who most probably the uncle looked after him and he called the uncle father. Scholars have debated about that, about whether it was his father or not, because scholars has believed that the nur of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not go to someone who worships the idol. It is said that the nur of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes on from Nabi Adam alayhi salam all the way to Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these people do not worship idols. All right. So Ibrahim was without, Allah was the one who actually enlightened Ibrahim, right, alayhi salam, and he has lots of understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why he attained the stage of Khalilullah, which means the intimate friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Ash'arite school of dialectics was then predominant in Egypt and Syria. Now, we saw Ash'ari, he was into dialectics, right? He was a Mu'tazilite at one time. And then we saw him moving away from this concept that the Mu'tazilites hold on to. And he went back to the books of Allah and he had changed his creed, right? So, but we don't know what happened along the way. They might take his old works and still consider as his work. So for us who are very, very limited in our knowledge, we do not make comments on such things, right? Oh, Ash'arite is a dialectician. He doesn't really understand the Quran that well. Oh, I learned, I read somewhere that dialecticians actually dwell into things which are not concerned with Islam, and they waste a lot of time. So we just leave it as that, right? So again, right, this is what it was at that time. Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was himself an Ash'arite who had committed to heart, according to the famous historian Maqrizi, the writings of Kutubuddin Abul Ma'ali al-Ash'ari on scholastic theology. So these are studies that they made, right? The theology is study of God. That means basically it is Tawhid for us now. So he was an Ash'arite. We are Ash'arites also actually. Most of us are not aware of it. Most of us in Singapore, our madhab for fiqh is most of us is Shafi'i, and our madhab for aqidah is Ash'ari. I come to know, I didn't know that also for many years that I was an Ash'ari. Anyway, I was when my friend invited me over to Brunei to give a talk. The Bruneians are very particular on what brand of Islam we bring into their country. Of course, in this modern world, being particular is one thing, but we need to be aware that our people, the young ones, are exposed to so many things on the internet that actually would confuse them about their religion, especially those who are brought up with not much Islamic religion, and later on in life they wanted to learn more about Islam, and they start Googling here and there. They might get the wrong information, right? Or they're exposed to many ideas out there. We have I was listening to Hamza Yusuf. He was mentioning that initially when he wanted to embrace Islam, he was exposed to a lot of the Shiite ideas, and so he actually went along with the Shiites. But then, as he's a thinking person, he was saying like the Shiites actually condemned the Sahabas of Rasulullah SAW, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Ali, and they even cursed the Prophet, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, they love Sayyidina Ali, and Sayyidina Osman, they cursed the Sahabas. And he says that it's really just, he doesn't find it, he finds it quite worrying that anyone would believe that the Prophet ﷺ would be friends with such bad people. So that is why he moves on to being a Sunni. The what I'm saying is that when I was invited to Brunei, right, they asked me for and I didn't know, they asked me for my Aqidah. Which Aqidah did I follow? Because they are very particular. You must be Shafi'i and you must be Ash'ari, because there are those who are Maturidis and Wahhabis and things like that. So I asked my nephew, niece, what is our mazhab? I never knew I had any mazhab for Aqidah. He says, oh, we are Ash'aris. Ash'aris, then we get to learn, and I move on to learn what is it all about, right? So we are not told. Anyway, Salahuddin even got his sons to learn these by heart. So this is a book of the Ash'ari, with the patronage afforded to the Ash'arite school by the princes of Ayyubid dynasty, and later on by the Mamluk sultans of Egypt. The Ash'arite school gained immense popularity in those countries. We also saw in our analysis last week that the Mamluks were actually more inclined to the Shafi'is, although the Mamluks did invite scholars from other, or did appoint scholars from other mazhabs to take up certain positions, right, as qadi. And so, but that is the main is Shafi. And that caused lots of unhappiness within the different schools of mazhab. Because of the unending polemical wranglings within the Hanbalites and Ash'arite theologians, the former had come to be looked upon as a fundamentalist and opponents of the more popular modernist Ash'arite schools. So you can see there's this, as we do note that Ibn Taymiyyah was a Hanbali. Hanbali is from Imam Ahmad Hanbal. And Hanbalite seems to have their own aqidah, right? We have the Maturidis, the Hanafis are Maturidis, and we didn't learn about Maturidi, we learned about Ash'ari, the former. So somehow people saw the Hanbalites as fundamentalists, whereas the Ash'ari as a bit more modern in their way of thinking. So the Ash'arite scholatism, which is a method of argumentation based upon syllogistic logic, appealed to reason and relied on the apparent meanings of the Quran text and tradition. So we can see that we saw that Ash'ari himself has moved away from that argumentation and syllogism in his later years, and he has embraced the traditional way of thinking of the Sahabas and scholars of old. All right, they do not look at it, he doesn't know the apparent meanings of the Quran. We saw at that as the Batanis who try to, find inner meanings or supposedly secret meanings of the Quran, which they come out with all kinds of ideas. So gotta be very careful, right? So this was what it was. The Hanbalites, just the other way around, were neither adept in discursive reasoning nor in philosophical induction, with the result that they were unable to justify their stand as dexterously as the Ash'ari. So the Ash'arites can argue, they've got all their points, right, presented, they have ideas and formulations and philosophical opinions, and that so the Hanbalites actually it's not as popular as the Ash'arites. More often, they left an impression of being unintelligent people, erudite, and shallow, having only a smattering of knowledge of inductive reasoning. So because they are not able to reason out, because they are not able to so more often, so as mentioned, because people look into this kind of intelligent or rationalizing, reasoning and things. So when they can't do that, people don't really get a special position, or people not impressed with it. This would have perhaps been the feeling of a proud and sensitive man that Ibn Taymiyyah was, resolved to learn all about dialectics and syllogistic forms, logic, and philosophy. Well, he's saying that a proud and a sensitive man. I'm not sure about being proud. I wouldn't want to use that word on scholars, because it might eject a certain kind of meaning which is undesirable. And being sensitive also, he's sensitive definitely to the situations around him, right? So but what is important, he needs to learn, and this is like Imam Ghazali. Before you comment on anything, right, you need to know what it is all about. You don't just comment without knowledge. So likewise, we have seen Ibn Taymiyyah here doing that. And he did learn all the ins and outs of the sciences, the fullness of knowledge, and enabled him to argue powerfully against the Greek philosophers. He pointed out the limitations of the methods and concepts of these sciences so masterfully that after him, no philosopher of note came forward to rebut his criticism. So he was good. He knew what is wrong with the various various fields of knowledge, and he presented to the people on why the Greek philosophers are wrong in many ways. In brief, Ibn Taymiyyah interpreted the Quran and the Sunnah, he interpreted the Quran and the Sunnah. We saw him very, very keen on tafsirs and hadith. He was a great hadith muhaddithin and a great mufassirin, established the superiority of Islam over heresy. So he removed those heresies or ideas that has crept into Islam, and he brought back the superiority of Islam. Philosophical concepts, also there are many philosophical concepts that are in contradiction with Islamic ideas, Islamic teachings and other faiths, and contributed to a genuine revival of religion after a deep study and deliberation that was necessary for fighting the religious and intellectual waywardness of the time. We saw that. We saw people moving into various aspects of combining Islam with the various traditions of people that they are exposed to. We know that Islam is moved right out from Mecca to Medina, out of the Arabian Peninsula into Iraq, into Persia, into East Europe, into Africa, and there were many customs and traditions that were brought into Islam, and there was a need for an intellect, right, to sieve out all these undesirable elements that has crept into Islam, and in fact has caused a lot of distortion of the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Seeking to surpass his opponents, the Jews and the Christians, the philosophers and the Batanites, and the mystics and the dialecticians, he mastered the methodology employed by them to attack Islam. All right, so these are the opponents that he actually had to face: the Jews, the Christians, the philosophers, the Batanites. You know, the Batanites are the ones who supposedly went through into the very, very deeper special meanings of the Quran. They changed a lot of terms. Mystics could be Sufis, and then we saw the Sufis also have also introduced a lots of elements, lots of foreign elements into Islam, and some of the Sufis are just so wayward. And of course, the dialectician. So he mastered his need before he could resolve the whole problem and situation at that time. In fact, his learning, his erudition, his intellectual attainment, and his mental greed always left his adversaries spellbound. So that means he was so good at it that they all were defeated. One of his bitterest rivals, Allama Kamaluddin al-Zamalqani, has paid a glowing tribute to Ibn Taymiyyah's encyclopedic knowledge in these words. So he has, scholars have rivals. Some people are not agreeable with the things that they say, are not happy with their ideas and concepts, you know, and they become rivals. But despite being a rival, he acknowledged the great knowledge of the encyclopedic knowledge of Ibn Taymiyyah. Allah has made knowledge of all the sciences as easy for Ibn Taymiyyah as iron has been softened for the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. Right. So we know Allah has blessed Nabi Dawood with the ability to shape iron, and the iron in the sense malleable. Right? You can put up the molds also. Whenever he was asked any question, he answered in a way that the audience taught him to have spent his whole life in acquiring knowledge of that very bunch of knowledge alone, and acknowledge him as the greatest authority on the subject. So basically, he has such a great knowledge. He has strong memory, definitely, and he knows what he has learned, and any question, right, is tackled in great depth, right? So much so that people think he worked so hard on that particular aspect of that branch of knowledge that he knows everything, but actually he has profound knowledge of all various branches of sciences of knowledge. Scholars subscribing to different juristic schools attended his discourses, and each one of them learned something that yet not known earlier. So this is the effect of learning under various scholars. So as we saw, he learned under at least 200 scholars and ideas, and he understands things very, very differently, right? And so the others who might have a few scholars only, learning from a few scholars, they actually learned a lot from him, which they didn't know. It never happened that he debated any point and was put to shame. Whatever he be the subject matter about which he spoke, whether religious or discursive, he surpassed all the authorities on that particular subject. In penmanship too, he was equally elegant. He writes well. All right, so that's his knowledge of various his breadth of knowledge that he has. The gifted teacher. Ibn Taymiyyah was only 22 when his father died in 682 after Hijrah. Within less than a year, he was not lying. He was asked to take the place of his father. He's young, 22, but as we know, he has got deep knowledge. So being 22 is no big problem for him. right, to take over his father's place. All right, within less than a year. So that means he was 22 when he took over his father's place. The very first address he delivered at that young age, in the presence of such learned doctors as Chief Qadi Bahauddin ibn al-Zaki al-Shafi'i, Sheikh Tajuddin al-Fazari, Zainuddin ibn al-Munja Hanbali, was full of thoughts that breathe and words that burn. His speech was so good, right? His thoughts were full of life, and his words really attacks, really has a profound effect in the hearts of people. It was a speech so impressive and forceful, sparkling and majestic that the historian Ibn Kathir lists it as an astonishing event in the annals for the year 683 after Hijrah. So powerful, so impressive, right? He has deep knowledge and he speaks well. You can see that he speaks well, he writes well, right? He is a gifted person, definitely a gifted teacher. Allah has blessed him with lots of gift. Sparkling and majestic, that the historian, right? An astonishing event. It was so admired by all, writes Ibn Kathir, that Sheikh Tajuddin al-Fazari himself put down the speech in writing. So Tajuddin was a great scholar at that time, and he himself was admired the speech of Ibn Taymiyyah. In the year 692 after Hijrah, Ibn Taymiyyah set out for Hajj with the Syrian caravan under the leadership of Al-Basti. These are all names that we are not familiar with, but they are people of great knowledge. Trials and tribulations. Having carved out a prominent place for himself among the leading scholars of Syria, Ibn Taymiyyah's fame was fast spreading as a popular lecturer when in the year 698 after Hijrah, for the first time, an unfortunate incident stirred up a tumult against him. So this occurs, right, with people of knowledge, people of great insights. There are always those who does not agree with you, and they would create trial, fitna, create things that will cause this great problem with you. Some persons belonging to Hamma submitted a question to Ibn Taymiyyah asking him to explain the nature and attributes of the Supreme Being in the light of certain Quranic verses and traditions which spoke of this in finite signs and symbols. So this is what happens. There's this person, right? There's a few people actually. They came around to ask him to explain about God. And they use Quranic verses which actually represents Allah in finite terms. For example, he rose above the Arash, right? And the translation istawa al-arsh, and he positions himself. Some translation, I've heard the Malay translation which says semayam, but it's semayam atas arash, which means he sits on arash, right? So that gives him, when you say someone sits, one sits on a chair, and arash is supposed to be a throne, right? That it gives a shape. Right? And then, of course, the hand of Allah in some Quran verses, right? Allah blows the spirit. So these are terms which are physical terms, and finite signs. Like, for example, the hadith which says that Allah, in the last third of the night, Allah says that he comes down to the first heaven to listen to those who ask from him. So that gives him a space, a time, a lot time and position and space to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that makes it finite. So they are confused. They want to know what is it all about. Ibn Taymiyyah gave a detailed reply to the question. He explained the view held by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and their successors, the religious doctors of yore, before, and the dialecticians like Imam Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, Qadi Abu Bakr Baqlani, Imam al-Haramain, and others that believe in the essential attributes of Allah is the most important part of the Muslim's faith. Right. So what is important for a believer is to understand the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and believe in the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, Allah is Al-Aziz, He is Almighty, He is a cherished, His might is cherished. This we are learning. All right. Ibn Taymiyyah proved from the writings of the early authorities that all of them acknowledged the attributes of Allah, whom they regarded beyond all similitude and free from all limitations. Avowal of the divine attributes by them was neither meant to anthropomorphize divine attributes, nor they considered it necessary to divest him of all the positive qualities in their grace to prove the eternity of his being. All right, now they have an idea, right, of the various attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say Allah is firm, mateen, what does mateen means, right? When you say Allah is Ali, what does Ali? Say Allah is Ra'uf, what does Ra'uf means? What Allah is Halim, what does it mean, right? But he says all this attribute was never to anthropomorphize, right? Anthropomorphize means to give shape to Allah, right? None of it is there to give shape to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because and nor they considered it necessary to divest him of all the positive qualities in their grace to prove. So they did not try to dwell into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are not allowed to dwell into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Verse of the Quran, very, very pertinent verse of the Quran is where Allah tells us not to dwell on the mutashabihat. Right? The mutashabihats are verses in you have the muhkamat and the mutashabihat. The mutashabihats are verses of the Quran which gives a resemblance. Right? There is a need for these verses of the Quran which gives a resembling Allah, not that Allah resembles human being, but to describe Allah in terms that the human being understands. Allah hears, but we know that Allah does not hear with the ears. The hearing of Allah is different, but to understand the concept of hearing, right? Like Allah, to tell people that whatever you say, Allah is aware of it. That's called hearing, right? And his hearing is beyond beyond finite terms. He hears beyond walls and things like that. He doesn't have to be in your presence to hear you. So to give Allah's ears is because he hears. No. And the Quran verses that Allah spoke to Nabi Musa alayhi salam, right? How he spoke it. Was there words that Nabi Musa hear? We don't know. But it could just be something that goes into the heart of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, right? So we do not put him in terms of the human terms, right? No doubt he uses the human terms, right, to say about the hands of Allah and things like that. But it is just to help the human being, right, to understand the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. That is why we are taught, right, after in that verse in Surah Al-Imran, where Allah talks about him creating the heavens in 6 days, and then he rose up to the Arash, right? This istawa. There are many explanations of the word istawa, and to put a term to it is very, very wrong, actually. But that's a problem with translation, because you need to put a term to it, right? And that's when those who doesn't understand Arabic, who doesn't go deep into the words in the Quran to understand things better, right? They somehow come to conclusions just by looking at the translation in their own language without much knowledge of the various opinions concerning that word istawa. All right, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the Quran, that there are these verses and there are those who dwell in these verses and cause others to go astray by their dwelling in these verses. But those who understand, they know that they cannot dwell in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they say, Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaytana. Our Rabb, do not divert our hearts. La tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaytana. After you have guided us. Wa hab lana min ladunka rahmah innaka antal wahhab. Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaytana wa hab lana min ladunka rahmah innaka antal. So we ask Allah to bless us with knowledge. All right, with the right guidance. And that's why we say, Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Every day in our 17 times, at least 17 times in our Fatiha, ask Allah to guide us, guide us, guide us. We don't want to be the Dhalin, that means those who have gone astray, and don't want to be the Maghdub, those who incur anger by disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While insisting that the nature of the Supreme Being cannot be adequately expressed in terms familiar to the finite human understanding, they had acknowledged the Supreme Being as a knowing, the powerful, the willing, the living, the hearing, the seeing, and the speaking. Seeing again, I mean, where we are concerned, we see with eyes. So are we going to give eyes to Allah? No, we don't. Right? These are terms which are familiar. Let's call it some mutashabihat, from the word shubaha, which means resembles. Right? It resembles in some form of understanding. When we say Allah sees us, we get very frightened when we disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He sees us. He hears us. We get very careful about what we say because He hears us. Right? He speaks. How does He speak? This is not for us to put Him in a human form. Right? So we just don't know. So we just say we leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is just beyond us to know His exact nature. So it's the attributes that we learn. These are the attributes: knowing, powerful, willing. So what's willing? He wills things down. Similarly, the theological doctors of old recognize other attributes ascribed to Allah without any interpretation, either designed to avoid the similitudes or negating those qualities in a way that reduces His being into sheer nothingness. Sheer nothing. So we are not allowed to go into such details or such opinions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Taymiyyah maintained that the conception of life, knowledge, or power did not attribute finite human form or personality to Allah, for He is neither a substance, it's subscribed with limits, not determined by measure, neither does He resemble bodies. So Ibn Taymiyyah maintained, right, that the conception of the life, knowledge, or power, so the understanding of Allah as all living, the understanding of Allah having knowledge or power, right, is not, did not attribute finite human form or personality to Allah. So it doesn't give a human form to Allah. Allah does not have any inhuman form. Allah is, we don't know, we don't want to talk about the form of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or personality to Allah, for He is neither a substance subscribed with limits. So we do not put Allah as in a shape with a substance in it and with limits, with hands and legs and feet and everything, not determined by measure. We do not measure Him out. Neither does He resemble bodies. No, He does not resemble any person. Qul huwallahu ahad. Allah is one. Say Allah is one. Allahu samad. Allah is independent, and whereas others depend on Him. He is independent but dependent on. That's the meaning of samad. Right? Of course, it is very extensive meaning. Lam yalid, he doesn't father. Walam yulad, nor was he fathered. Right? Walam yakullahu, and not be for him kufuwan, any similarity at all. Not even a single similarity for him. All right, so neither is he substance, nor do substance exist in him. Neither is he an accident, nor do accidents exist in him. He sits upon the throne after the manner which He Himself has described, and in that same sense which He Himself means, which is a sitting far removed from any notion of contact or renting upon or local situation. Right, so the sitting of Allah is Allah, as the translation says, istawa, right, al arsh, and the translation says sits on an arash. But He's saying the sitting is not like he's got you sit, but you have to contact with the chair, right? Or you rent upon it, or you have a space. No, Allah is beyond time and space. He is above the throne and above all things, even to the utmost ends of everything that has a being. He is distinct from the creatures by his attributes. Neither is there anything besides him in his essence, nor is his essence in any other besides him. So that's what he's saying. No way we just stop it as that. We just know he is aware, is this and that, all the 99 names of Allah, his attributes, but he is not like any of his creatures. Therefore, it is not correct to conceive the inconceivable being or one, I prefer the word one rather than being, on the pattern of any infinite form or substance, or to consider the limiting adjuncts of human expressions as circumscribing him with the limitations of finite forms, qualities, or personifications. Right? So and he is not confined by the limitations of human beings. It's just different from any of us. So this is the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah went on further to explain that certain dialecticians, either too much impressed by the Greek philosophy. All right, so it's dialecticians. All right, yeah, impressed. So the Greek philosophers. Who are the Greek philosophers? Okay, we've got Aristotle, we've got Socrates, we've got Plato, and these are human beings who try to figure out who God is, and no one can figure out God, right? And Rasulullah SAW also didn't go into the details of who Allah is. So we are people who believe in Rasulullah SAW and who believe that he is a messenger of Allah, that he gains knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And people, the Greek philosophers are just thinking out on their own, using the intellect to understand God, which is not possible. All right, certain dialecticians, either too much impressed by the Greek philosophical concepts or animated by an extensive zeal to uphold the unity of Godhead, interpreted the divine attributes in a way that was directly opposed to what the Prophet ﷺ had taught and was understood by the companions and later scholars. So they actually borrowed ideas from the Greek philosophers. All right, we have Greek mythology, we heard of Zeus, we heard of Medusa, we heard of Hercules, all these are Greek mythology, where they put shape in gods and make God as the chief god, and you've got wives of God, sons of God. All these are Greek nonsense. All right. The negation of divine attributes more often ended up in reducing Allah Almighty to a nameless, formless nothing. So that is another way. When you negate the divine attributes and put it in a human form, then it becomes nothing. But Allah is all great. The interpretations of these dialecticians was thus far removed from the teachings of the precursors of faith, the earlier theologians, and even their own mentors. So they have gone a long way out. So we hope, we pray to Allah, protect us from being dhalin, those who are astray because of their ideas that they have embraced. Ibn Taymiyyah severely taxed these misguided scholastics, whom he called an ignoramus lot, unaware of the true worth and merit of the prophetic teaching, and blind followers of the Indo-Greek philosophical concepts. So they seem to be obsessed with these Greek philosophies, and they forget that the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ is the teaching, and is a teaching that is the greatest of all knowledge. He concluded his reply with several examples of philosophers who were ultimately disillusioned by their vain pursuit and ended up with an expression of sorrowful disenchantment. So you give examples of these philosophers who realize that, whatever they are doing is useless and everything, and they are so disillusioned with themselves. Many of them, said Ibn Taymiyyah, acknowledged a religious dogma before joining the great majority. Right? So they are not able to consolidate. The reply by Ibn Taymiyyah was a full-fledged treatise, well documented with quotations from the Quran and Hadith, which restated the truth in a convincing manner, criticized severely the philosophers and dialecticians, and sounded a new note in theological writings by its masterly blending of a spirited defense of religion with the elegance of style and expression. The way it was warmly received by the Hanbalites inflamed a feeling of bitter resentment among the dialecticians and Ash'arites, who held posts of influence and authority in administration. So we realized that the dialecticians, they were favored by the authority at that time. They asked our rights also, right, of the Mamluks. And during Ibn Taymiyyah was with the Mamluks during the Mamluk times, right? Describe the events of 698 after Hijrah. Ibn Kathir writes that a group of theologians which opposed Ibn Taymiyyah demanded that he should appear before the Hanafite Qazi Sheikh Jalaluddin to clarify certain points, but Ibn Taymiyyah refused to do so. Right. His adversaries kicked up a tumult against him, but normal conditions were ultimately restored owing to the firm handling of the situation by Amir Saifuddin Jahan. So they were trying to stop a lot of unhappiness, quarrels, disputes, and everything. But the Amir, right, the ruler at that time was wise in restoring good. Situation might have taken an ugly turn, but the Tatar advance against Syria left no room for any acrimonious disputation among the educated circles. So somehow the Tatar stops the attack of the Tatar on Syria, right, sort of stops all this unhappiness. Question, however, afforded another opportunity to Ibn Taymiyyah to rise as a spirited defender of the faith and a popular leader of the masses. All right, so that's for today. We take a break now. Pause for a while.